Adventurous kids explore with education and learning what a wild life is in the Everglades. I want to explore the Museum of Discovering Science. What plants do butterflies like? I want to know about Key West. Adventurous kids, learning and fun. Adventurous kids!
Today I'm going to tell you about time zones. A time zone is a region of the globe that observes a uniform standard for legal, commercial, and social purposes. Time zones tend to follow the boundaries of countries and their subdivisions instead of strictly following longitude, because it is convenient for areas in close commercial or other communication to keep the same time. When well-regulated mechanical clocks became widespread in the early 19th century, each city began to use local mean solar time. Apparent and mean solar time can differ by up to around 15 minutes, as described by the equation of time. Because of elliptical shape of the Earth's orbit around the Sun and the tilt of the Earth's axis, mean solar time has days of equal length, and the accumulated difference between the two sums to zero after a year. Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, was established in 1675 when the Royal Observatory was built as an aid to mariners to determine longitude at sea, providing a standard reference time, while each city in England kept a different local time. The time zone went along the prime meridian, 0 degrees longitude. It symbolizes the universal starting point and is the reference point for every time zone in the world. It gets its name from the English city of Greenwich, for which it passes through. Today, the time zone is now formally known as Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, but GMT is still commonly used. Local solar time became increasingly inconvenient as rail transport and telecommunications improved, because clocks differed between places by amounts corresponding to the differences in their geographic longitudes, which varied by 4 minutes of time for every degree of longitude. For example, Bristol is about 2.5 degrees west of Greenwich, East London. So when it is solar noon in Bristol, it is about 10 minutes past solar noon in London. The use of time zones accumulates these differences into longer units, usually hours, so that nearby places can share a common standard for timekeeping. The first adoption of a standard time was on December 1st, 1847, in Great Britain, by railway companies using GMT kept by portable chronometers. The first of these companies to adopt standard time was the Great Western Railway, GWR, in November 1840. This quickly became known as railway time. About August 23rd, 1852, time signals were first transmitted by telegraph from the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. Even though 98% of Great Britain's public clocks were using GMT by 1855, it was not made Britain's legal time until August 2nd, 1880. Some British clocks from this period have 2-minute hands, one for local time, one for GMT. On November 2nd, 1868, the then British colony of New Zealand officially adopted a standard time to be observed throughout the colony, and was the first country to do so. It was based on the longitude 172 degrees 30 east of Greenwich, that is 11 hours 30 minutes ahead of GMT. This standard was known as New Zealand Mean Time. Timekeeping on the American railroads in the mid-19th century was somewhat confused. Each railroad used its own standard time. usually based on the local time of its headquarters or more important terminal. As the railroad was trained, schedules were published using its own time. Some junctions served by railroads had a clock for each railroad, each showing a different time. Charles F. Dodd proposed a system of 1-hour standard time zones for American railroads about 1863, although he published nothing on the matter at that time and did not consult railroad officials until 1869. The first known person to conceive of a worldwide system of time zones was the Italian mathematician Crocofilo Bettini. He introduced the idea in his book Miranda, published in 1858. He proposed 24-hourly time zones, which he called longitude days. The first centered on the meridian of Rome. He also proposed universal time to be used in astronomy and telegraphy. His book attracted no attention until long after his death. Scottish-born Canadian Sir Sandford Fleming proposed the worldwide system of time zones in 1879. By about 1900, almost all inhabited places on Earth have adopted one or other standard time zone, but only some of these used an hourly offset from GMT. Many apply the time at a local astronomical observatory to an entire country. Without any reference to GMT, it took many decades before all the time zones were based on the same standard offset from GMT UTC. In 1929, most major countries have adopted hourly time zones. Nepal was the last country to adopt a standard offset, shifting slightly to UTC plus 545 in 1956. Today, all nations use standard time zones for selective purposes, but they do not all apply the concept as originally conceived. Newfoundland, India, Iran, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, the Marquesas, as well as parts of Australia, use half-hour divisions from standard time. And some nations, such as Nepal, and some provinces, such as the Chatham Islands of New Zealand, use quarter-hour divisions. Some countries, such as China and India, use a single time zone, even though the extent of their territory far exceeds 15 degrees of longitude. Russia is traditionally divided into 11 time zones, but in 2011 the number was reduced to 9. Then President Dmitry Medvedev said at the time that he would like to see even fewer in place. Still, in 2014, the 2 removed time zones were reinstated, making the number of time zones 11 again. Since the 1920s, a nautical standard time system has been in operation for ships on the high seas. Nautical time zones are an ideal form of the terrestrial time zone system. Under the system, a time change of 1 hour is required for each change of longitude by 15 degrees. A nautical daylight is implied but not explicitly drawn on time zone maps. It follows the 180th meridian, except where it is interrupted by territorial waters adjacent to land, forming gaps. It is a pole-to-pole dashed line. A ship within the territorial waters of any nation will use the nation's standard time, but will revert to nautical standard time upon leaving its territorial waters. The captain is permitted to change the ship's clocks at the time of the captain's choice, following the ship's entry into another time zone. The captain often chooses midnight. Ships going in a shuttle traffic over a time zone border often keep the same time zone all the time to avoid confusion about work, meal, and shop opening hours. Still, the timetable for port calls must follow the land time zone. To understand time zones, start by thinking the shape of the Earth. You know Earth is a sphere that spins on an imaginary pole called its axis. Every 24 hours, the Earth makes a complete rotation. We call each full turn a day. Imagine shining a flashlight on the globe. Only part of it will receive light. The opposite side would be dark. As the Earth rotates, different parts of Earth receive sunlight or darkness, giving us day and night. As your location on Earth rotates into sunlight, you will see the sunrise. When your location rotates out of sunlight, you see the sunset. Imagine if the entire Earth had a single time zone. It would be the middle of the day in some places, but it would be morning, evening, again in the middle of the night in other places. Since different parts of Earth enter and exit daylight at different times, we need different time zones. As Earth rotates on its axis, it moves about 15 degrees every 60 minutes. After 24 hours, it has completed a full rotation of 360 degrees. The scientists use this information to divide the Earth into 24 sections or time zones. Each time zone is 15 degrees of longitude wide. The idea behind multiple time zones is to divide the world into 24 15-degree time zones and set the clocks accordingly in each zone. The time at Greenwich, which is called Greenwich Mean Time (GMT). As you move west of Greenwich, every 15-degree section or time zone is an hour earlier than GMT, while each time zone to the east is an hour later. When it is noon in the Eastern Time Zone, it is 11 a.m. in the Central Time Zone, 10 a.m. in the Mountain Time Zone, and 9 a.m. in the Pacific Time Zone. Instead of the nice, neat lines of longitude running top to bottom around the globe, there are many irregularities with a variety of reasons for the variances. An example is where a time zone border follows the border of a country. This occurs around the borders of China and India, both of which have a single time zone across the entire country. To watch the spans of mammoth 11 time zones on a map, it only adheres to 9 of the 11. On March 28, 2010 at 2 a.m., while much of Russia turned their clocks forward, Russians in the nation's Udmurt Republic, Samar Oblast, Kamakucha, and Koucha regions neglected daylight savings at the government's behest. The small island of Marcus Fur in the Baltic Sea is only 300 meters by 80 meters at its farthest points. The countries of Sweden and Finland own this island half and half. The Swedish side keeps the Swedish time, and the Finnish side keeps to Finnish time. Islands are usually prime candidates of irregular shaped time zones, so that they are in the same one. France is definitely not the world's largest country, but France leads the world in number of time zones with a total of 12. This is because France still holds territories around the globe, from French Polynesia, 10 hours behind UTC, to the islands of Wallis and Futuna, 12 hours ahead of UTC. China is massive, but only follows one time zone. In 1949, under Mao Zedong, the Chinese government switched from 5 time zones to 1, Beijing Standard Time. The switch aimed to promote national unity, but in eastern areas of the country, the sun does not rise till 10 a.m. Because of all longitude lines which define time zones, meet at the 2 poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, do not have official time zones. Instead, some international research centers follow their home country's time zone, while others follow the time zone of the nearest inhabited area. Still others simply follow UTC. In August 2015, North Korea decided to break with imperialism and go back to its original time zone of 8.5 hours behind GMT, used before the Korean liberation from Japan. Interestingly, North Korea made the switch the same day as the 70th anniversary of the liberation. A University of Maryland study found that traveling west is easier for our internal clocks to understand because it simply extends our days, while traveling east does the opposite. Not to gain an entire day. The international day line roughly follows the 180-degree line of longitude, which splits the Pacific in 2. Fancy 2 birthdays in a row? Celebrate in Summa GMT plus 13. Next morning, take the 30-mile flight to neighboring American Samoa, GMT -11, and minus 25 minutes later, having crossed the international date line. Land on your birthday again. Travel in another direction if you want to skip Christmas. Many computer operating systems include the necessary support for working with all, or almost all, possible local times based on the various time zones. Internally, operating systems use the UTC as their basic timekeeping standard, while providing services for converting local times to and from UTC, and also the ability to automatically change the local time conversions at the start and end of daylight saving time in the various time zones. Email systems and other messaging systems, IRC chat, etc., timestamp messages using UTC, or else include the sender's time zone as part of the message, allowing the receiving program to display the message's date and time of sending in the recipient's local time. Calendar systems nowadays usually tie their timestamps to UTC and show them differently on computers that are in different time zones. That works when having telephone or internet meetings. It works less when traveling because the calendar events are assumed to take place in the time zone the computer or smartphone was on when creating the event. The event can be shown at the wrong time. Thanks for watching this Adventurous Kids episode.
What did you learn today?
Adventurous Kids!
Adventurous Kids!
What was the most interesting fact?
Adventurous Kids!
Adventurous Kids!
Adventurous